Hello friends, my name is Chanchal Cabrera and you are joining me here at Innisfree Farm and Botanic Garden on Vancouver Island. And we are here today to celebrate Mason and HerbRally and 10,000 subscribers, which is quite an achievement. So Mason has asked a few of his friends to talk about 10 topics to do with herbal medicine. So here we go. Let's see how much we can say in just a few minutes on 10 different things. I have a list. He gave us a lot of options of questions, so these are the ones that got picked here. So what is my favorite part of being a herbalist? What's the big why that keeps me learning and growing? So I think one of the things is really that the plants have not yet revealed themselves to us in their fullest expression. So the mystery, I think, is what keeps me going. I love to know that there's stuff I don't know. I love to know that the plants still have secrets, still have more to reveal. There's still more for us to learn, not just me personally, but in all of us, to learn more about nature and plants and how we fit in. So I just find that very fascinating, to feel such a small part of such a huge thing as nature, and to be exploring that juxtaposition of us tiny puny little people and this huge green world we live in, and how we navigate through that. So my favorite part of being a herbalist is that I get to talk to plants, and sometimes we talk back. What's the first plant I remember having a relationship with as a kid was probably nasturtiums, because that was my first garden. I was 3. I had one of those big old white stone sinks, and my dad let me fill it up with soil and plant something, and I planted nasturtiums. I don't think I knew what they were, but they were a pretty flower, and they decorated some of the salads, and I thought that was really cool. I didn't eat the salads, I didn't like plants that much, but I did have a relationship with nasturtium. What advice do I wish that I had had as a herbal student, or when I was starting out on my herbal path? What do I wish I'd learned or done sooner? Well, I think honestly I would say not to take myself so seriously. I used to somehow think that it was my responsibility to fix everybody's problems, and if it didn't work, that there was something wrong with what I was doing or with me. So to lighten up a little bit as a practitioner and trust the herbs more, and not feel like it's my job to fix everybody else's problems. That's very personal. That's how I roll in the world. And so I would say, as a herbalist, as a young herbalist and herbal student, it would have been useful to have been told more emphatically that you're not responsible for fixing anybody else's problems, and you're certainly not responsible if it doesn't work. Now, you are responsible for knowing your stuff and doing a good job, but you can't take on your shoulders the pain and suffering and grief and fear of all your patients. It will not work. You will not make it through. So I think for me that would have been, I was told it, I don't think I embodied it for quite a long time. So learning to shut the door of the office and walk out and leave it behind you was a really important thing. Not taking it home, not feeling like in your off time you need to be trying to help everybody. Let's see, how did I begin to mold my herbal path as a teacher, and what was my first teaching experience? Well, my very first teaching experience was embarrassing. I was teaching for the Women's Institute, which is a kind of ladies' club that was started around in the war to help women who are at home to be more effective in growing their food and putting food by and feeding their families during wartime. So the Women's Institute in Britain, it actually exists in North America and other countries as well. It came out of Britain. They meet every week, the ladies, and they knit and crochet and have tea and cakes and talk and have speakers. So I was invited to speak to this group, and it was about 45 minutes from where I was living, so I had to take the bus. And I was terribly nervous. So I'd written out my speech and I'd more or less memorized it, and it was about 45 minutes. But on the way, on the bus, I managed to imbibe an entire large bottle of Rescue Remedy because I was so nervous. So I drank the whole thing, which was a fair whack of brandy. So I wasn't nervous anymore, but I got up to give my speech, and I guess I must have been nervous because my 45 minutes was over in about 25 minutes, and I just run through it, and not really looking up hardly. And then I looked up and looked around the room, this kind of auditorium room, not very big, and there were a number of older ladies, every single one of whom was asleep. So I guess I wasn't a very compelling speaker, and I thoroughly bored them all. And as soon as I stopped talking, they all woke up and had tea and cake. And they were very happy, and they said it was a good talk. But I remember little or nothing of it because of all the brandy. That was my introduction to teaching. Here's an interesting one. How do I retain so much information regarding clinical herbalism, and how do I store it? Notebooks, flags and reference books, or just memory? Well, Mason, that's an interesting question you've come up with. I am an old-fashioned girl. I like pen and paper. So I keep index cards of all my materia medica, so 8.5 by 5 inch cards. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 stapled together if there's a lot to learn. It means I can add anytime I learn about a herb. I've got a place to drop that little nugget, that little snippet of information. Now my students will do it digitally, but I like paper, and I like to carry those cards around. If I go to teach a class, I'll take a stack of cards and I'll teach from those cards. They're just bullet point memory jogger stuff. So, and some of them go back to the 1980s when I was in herb school, and I know that because they're written with an ink pen, and that was 1980s. So I definitely keep my index cards. I have a large reference library. There are tabs in some of those books. Obviously I do a lot of stuff on the internet. I do have a huge amount of information in my computer, and for better or worse I have a pack rat brain, so I seem to manage to hold on to a lot of data. Not always what I want to remember or when I need to remember it. So I remember things like my 5-year-old school friend's teddy bear's name. This is not useful information anymore, but there it is. I'm quite good at trivial pursuits unless you ask me anything sporting or musical, in which case I'm not the partner you want to play with. But factoids seem to find a place to dwell in my busy brain. So a lot of it just comes out. Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to say until someone asks a question and I start to speak, and there it is. And sometimes it doesn't work. And then you go and look it up. And that's okay too. So I use all of the resources actually. Who do I go to for health advice? Well, like many of us, I don't go to myself. I'm not very good at that. I go to my sister, Dee, who is a medical herbalist in Scotland, and we keep each other on track. And if I needed more than that, I would go to Donnie Yance, who is my mentor and teacher. So that's where I apprenticed, and that's where I would go if I needed more than that. And of course my GP actually, and the healthcare professionals in my community have been great. I have a great massage therapist, craniosacral therapist, so I do that kind of self-care as well. What is my best piece of advice for running a clinical practice? Oh, that's a really interesting question. So I think it depends a lot where you're at in your journey as a herbalist. I think if you're just getting started, it's actually great to be in with another practitioner. I actually think it's great to have associates. I now have an associate in my practice, Alina Baker. She's been out of college a few years, but she came out through COVID, so it was hard to get started. And then if you don't get started right out of school, you kind of lose your nerve. So she needed that little bit of a support and push, and I was the lucky person that she applied to come and do a residency with me in my practice, and now has moved to my community, and we are associates in the clinic. And that for me is wonderful because she's picking up a lot of work that I don't have time for, but it's also good for her because she's got a ready-made practice. She's not having to go hustling for patients, and we meet twice a week to review cases and discuss the files. So I think if you're starting out, then going into an established practice as an associate of some sort for a few years is probably a really good idea, because you don't know what you don't know, and you're going to reinvent the wheel. So why not go to someone who's already figured out a lot and take what you learn what you can there, and then perhaps go on your own later. I personally love having a shared practice. I've been solo, and I've been in a big multidisciplinary clinic with several rooms and several different practitioners, and I've now found a sort of happy medium. I don't want to be a solo anymore. It's a lot to hold. You need somebody to talk it over with, bounce ideas around, help each other to think differently, think outside your own limitations about what a patient could be doing. So that would be my advice, I suppose, not to think you have to do it all on your own, to see if there's a way to share the responsibilities. So what is the most versatile herb that I have used personally and that I would highly recommend? Well, So there's a little game we play sometimes called Desert Island Herbs. If you were washed up on a desert island, what 3 herbs would you have to have? If that's all you could have forevermore, there's no other herbs on the planet, and you got 3 to pick from, what would they be? And right at the top for me is going to be garlic. Because, first of all, I love eating it. And it's antimicrobial, it's, did I say it's antimicrobial, it's antifungal, it's all those things you need on a desert island when you've got no other way of keeping your body healthy if you get scratches and bug bites and such. And I just think garlic is so powerful as a medicine, so immediately powerful. You take it and within minutes you can start to taste it in the breath, and you know that it's working in the lungs. And so I think that would be my my most versatile herb, going between food and medicine, and even sweet and savory. So I have a honey upstairs that an apprentice made for me last year with chili and garlic and honey, and it is unbelievably good. So that would be my probably one of my favorite herbs. Which herb have I found useful for a condition that is different that we would commonly understand? So I want to speak for a moment here about linden, about tilia or lime blossom. I have a beautiful big tree here, and we harvest it prolifically. Back in about 2000, maybe 2001, when I was studying for my Master of Science in Herbal Medicine, I was studying with the Scottish School of Herbal Medicine, and we did a field trip to a place in the centre of Scotland, a big old house where we stayed, and there was grounds, and we were doing classes and workshops there. And we were engaged in the Goethean science model. So we were doing the practice of observing plants and subjectively experiencing them, and then objectively analyzing them, and then coming to some kind of shared conclusion of the subjective objective. It's the 7-step process of noticing nature that Goethe developed. So there were 9 or 10 of us in the cohort of the master's program, but we were sharing that weekend with more students of the Scottish school, and so there was about 28 of us, I think, and we spent the whole weekend, 3 days, studying linden. At first we didn't know what we were studying because we were blindfolded, and turned around and walked out in the woods and left for an hour or more blindfolded with trees, and each individually. It was a huge property with lots of trees. And then we had to have an experience of that tree, not knowing what it was, just experiencing it, utterly subjective. And then we went on over the 3 days to study it in all kinds of ways, from smelling it, tasting it, hugging it, reading the science on it, making medicines from it. We ended up making a flower essence, and this is what changed for me with how I use linden. So most of us know linden as a plant for anxiety and stress and hypertension, insomnia, maybe high blood pressure, and it's a diaphoretic. But what our collective study for 3 days of this group studying this plant, what we determined is that linden's real special role that makes it very different to other plants and different to how most of us learn it in school is its capacity to heal the wounds of someone who had inadequate mothering in early childhood. So a young baby or a child that lost their mother, or had a mother that was otherwise preoccupied and unable to care for the child properly, they felt unloved or abandoned. That's what linden's for. It's for healing that heart wound, that heart soreness that would come from feeling insufficiently mothered. That's how I use linden. I use it for all the other things as well, but that's definitely how I use linden. Okay, so this is a controversial question. What are my thoughts about the regulation of herbs? Herbalists. I think I need a drink for this one. It's just water. So my thoughts about the regulation of herbalists is I am conflicted. I don't think that all of it should always be a free-for-all. There are lives on the line. There are poisonous plants. There are plants that are massively effective if used properly, but not useful otherwise. There are conditions that are very amenable to very simple herbal remedies, and there are other things that really do need some expertise and and accountability. And I think that's perhaps the thing that's missing. If you don't have regulation, you don't have accountability. And when you're talking about medicine and when you're talking about lives, you need accountability. The patient, the customer needs to know that you have some level of responsibility and appropriate training for what you're attempting to do. So I'm in no way saying that we should regulate all herbalists across the board always. Like, I'm totally in favor of the community herbalists and the folk herbalists and all of that. But I do think that if you're going to claim to be a clinician, a clinical herbalist, where you're actually working with patients and diseases, then I do think that some kind of regulation is appropriate. What the herbal community has landed on is self-regulation, which is fine, but it is optional and voluntary. And I'm not in any way saying that we should go beyond that and look for licensing. That's a very controversial topic, and I'm certainly not going to open that Pandora's box right now. But I do think that at the least, people who are clinicians should join a professional association and meet the educational standards and abide by that code of ethics and work within the scope of practice that that association will have established. I think that is the least that we should be expected to offer to our patients. They are vulnerable, trusting, and paying good money. So you need to measure up to that and show up in a really professional way. And if regulation is what you call it, then that's just a word really for actually being responsible and accountable for your actions. And so, yes, I'm in favor of that. I'm not saying that I'm in favor of licensing, which is a government-imposed different kind of thing. Self-regulation is what herbalists have done so far, and it seems to be working. And what is my vision or dream for the future of herbalism and herbal medicine? Well, that is our last question, and that's a big question. My vision or dream. I would love to see herbal medicine holding its head up high in the world of healthcare. I feel like we undermine our own value by not taking ourselves seriously enough and not being professional enough and not being accountable enough. And I think it is a pity that we don't let the plants do what they really can do, because we get in the way of that. So my vision would be that herbal medicine is as widely practiced as any of the other healing arts, and as reputable and respectable as any of the other healing arts. I would love to see it more integrated into the mainstream model. Certainly in the UK that has happened to some extent. There are shared medical / herbal practices now under the National Health Service, where practitioners, herbalists, work in medical clinics. They work in hospitals. The Whips Cross Training Clinic is a herbal medicine training clinic in a hospital in London. So I think that's exciting. I think that might be the way of the future. It certainly isn't the way it is in Canada, where I live right now. Right now, we're just trying to keep access to herbs. So it's one thing to talk about regulation of herbalists. It's something else to talk about regulation of herbs. And it's quite easy to see how the practice of herbal medicine is being decimated by the difficulties of getting our products and practicing within the law of the product, not the practice per se, but the access to the herbs, and finding good, sustainable herb suppliers. So if I had kids today and they were asking me, Mom, what I should do for my career, I would say, become a herb farmer, because we need you. We need more herbs grown sustainably, grown responsibly. And so again, part of my vision would be not just herbalists and herbal medicine more embraced by mainstream, but also that more people go into farming and growing the herbs and providing the raw materials for the herbalists to do their work. We can't do well if the herbs are not there for us. So it's a really big, important part of being a herbalist, is to find sustainable sources and reputable suppliers, and consider growing as much of your own medicine as you can. And that is the end of our 10 questions for 10,000 subscribers for HerbRally. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that was entertaining. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit the button.